On today's show, the core returns, but who rounds out the forwards next on this edition of Locked On Capitals?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minute Cast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Pierre-Luc Dubois gamble that the Capitals made last summer and how well that paid off for the Capitals this past season. A bit later, I'll talk about the goaltending depth for the Capitals. Not talking so much on the big team, but down in the AHL and ECHL. A bit later, we'll talk about no drama on defenses. I don't expect there to be a whole lot of changes on the blue line, but just to get it going here, the core returns, but who rounds out the forwards? And, to be clear here, I don't think the Capitals need to make a whole lot of changes as they did make it to the second round of the playoffs. And they played very well during the regular season and, of course, face some challenges in the postseason, more specifically in the second round. So what are some of the holes in the boat that we call the Capitals, and how do they plan to plug those holes in the boat? So let's talk about that in the first segment. I think, the core of the team is going to be back. I'm talking Ovechkin. I'm talking Carlson. I'm talking Wilson, the guys that have been on this team for quite some time. So the identity of this team is still in place, and you saw some young players step forward. You saw some players that the Capitals acquired last summer step forward and take on big roles. But I think the one thing that we know for certain is that all of the players that we saw last season will not be making their return this next season. So let's talk about that, the forwards in particular, and the questions that surround it. So let's take a look at the forward group heading into camp. And here's the way the lines might look on opening night. As you take a look at Alex Ovechkin, starting first, left wing there, Dylan Strome center, and then a bit of a question mark on the right wing. What did we see last season? We saw Protas, we saw Wilson play there. So I think that the first line right wing is a bit of a question mark. How things could look potentially on the second line is Protas left wing, Pierre-Luc Dubois center, and Tom Wilson right wing. I know that we've seen Protas play on the right. He can also play on the left. And then the big question mark, the third line that gave the Capitals a lot of issues this past season, that they are looking to revitalize that. So you take a look at the left wing, a bit of a question mark. I think that Connor McMichael or fill in the blank, Hendrix Lapierre, or a player like that will be the third line center with Ryan Leonard on the right wing. And then the fourth line, Brandon Duhaime left wing, Nick Dowd center, of course, and then the question on right wing, as we saw Radish, different players cycle through on that fourth line. Now, obviously, we've got some gaps, but let's start with what we know. Is that Alex Ovechkin is going to be back, playing in his 21st season and playing on the left wing. I know we saw sample sizes of him playing on the right wing. But I think if there's two positions and two players that are locked down, it's Alex Ovechkin and Dylan Strome on the first line. And he's 3 goals of 900. Yes, 900 goals and just 9 away from hitting the 1,500 game mark. So an absolute icon. Dylan Strome is your top line center once again, and he's earned it. And the biggest thing is the chemistry. Is that there were some questions that when Nick Backstrom stepped away from hockey, who is the guy to pick up that baton from Backstrom? And Dylan Strome has absolutely knocked it out of the park. So no questions as far as that is concerned. Again, the things that could change that I can anticipate is the moves that Chris Patrick makes on July 1st or before that could change the lineup. When the Capitals acquired Pierre-Luc Dubois, I thought there was the possibility that he could be that first line center, but Dylan Strome definitely made that his own. On line 2, this is where it could be really interesting, as we've got Protas and Dubois, two big bodies who can cycle and control the puck, and Tom Wilson brings the edge and experience. 2, huge bodies. 3, if you think about it. Protas is a tall man. Pierre-Luc Dubois is a big guy in his own right. And Tom Wilson, that could be the physicality line to just really be the bulldozer out there against opposing teams. And honestly, that could be the Caps' most effective line. You take a look at it. This is just kind of how it's penciled in the beginning part of June with, the roster that I see it. Again, this could be subject to change based on additions and who steps up in camp, but it could be interesting. Some shakeups, if you will, with the forward lines. And Ryan Leonard, as we know, got called up after Boston College, or shall we say joined the team after Boston College wrapped up their season. And in a small sample size, I thought played well considering the circumstances. Only scored that one empty netter. Ultimately, I think we were hoping for more, but I think it's easy to lay out these big expectations on these young players. I think it's important to realize that sometimes it takes a while for them to gain their footing in the National Hockey League. But Ryan Leonard, I think, looks to take his game to the next level in his first full season in the NHL as a Capital. He had a very promising snippet there, and if McMichael at the center should be a great foundation on the third line. I think as we look at the center, I think that Connor McMichael is the front runner, of course, his native position, but in that mix as well is Hendrix Lapierre. Say he really does, just take his game to the next level. That could be interesting. The fourth line with Nick Dowd stirring the drink has for years, with Brandon Duhaime, who has been a great compliment to Nick Dowd, that it'll ultimately be interesting to see the player that they add to that mix. So you want penalty killers, you got them. But what about the missing pieces on this team? Lars Eller is a UFA, had just 15 points. Maybe you bring him back cheap for leadership. That was just kind of something I penciled in as an outside thing, but ultimately don't think that's the right idea. I think if there's one player to circle that could be interesting is Anthony Beauvillier. Again, he was the only player that was acquired at the trade deadline with no real high hopes. I didn't have any high hopes for him. I thought third line. I maybe thought, a depth piece, but we saw him huge in the playoffs and getting some work in on that first line with Ovechkin and Strome, that I think if there's a player that they can, sign to an extension and not mortgage the farm or pay him too much, I think that Anthony Beauvillier is the guy. They kind of give the full court press if they want to bring back a player. Andrew Mangiapane was good to an extent. I guess I like his physical. I like how he gets under opponent's skin. And there were definitely snapshots of greatness from Andrew Mangiapane that I guess we didn't see, throughout the full season. But a pretty good player. But I think they may have better options. And Taylor Radish as well, as he was a guy that I had, when they acquired him, that was kind of the long shot. And to be clear here, Taylor Radish was not horrible, but he wasn't great either. So I don't expect Taylor Radish to be back. I referenced earlier Hendrix Lapierre, who, was penciled in to be that third line center to start last season. Didn't fit in, that third line center. It's, this is going to be the summer that Chris Patrick takes care of this. Make no mistake about it, that Hendrix Lapierre will at least be given an opportunity in camp to see what he has. Again, it's my belief that this needs to be the season for Hendrix Lapierre, or they need to see what is behind door number 2. Now, training camp could be his last big opportunity to stick full time. High hopes for him that I think that a lot of people thought that he would have shot up much quicker than he has not been the case. But all things considered, that is at least a loose sketch how I think things could be laid out. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the Capitals' blue line. I don't expect any big shakeups, but listen, anything is possible. I'll talk about the blue line and how I think it'll shape up straight ahead. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. And the thing I like about it, it is a nutritious option for breakfast. Sometimes when you reach up, you might reach for a sugary cereal, maybe a donut or something of that nature. Why not start off your breakfast on the right foot? And if for a midday snack, instead of reaching for a bag of potato chips or something of that nature, reach for Wonderful Pistachios. Now, personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether I'm at my desk or on a road trip or just need that quick protein boost. They're my perfect go-to snack. And if you love cracking open every shell, the in-shell options are one of my classic favorites as well. So get snacking and get cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So taking a look at the blue line, I think things look pretty well. I don't expect to see any major changes, but, things could surprise me, could surprise you. What are some of the things that we know is that John Carlson is playing his last year under contract. And I don't ever want to forget his contributions to this team. But, I got to say that Chris Patrick was kind of non-committal as far as his future on this team. John Carlson himself was a bit non-committal about joining this team or signing an extension. I think that, for Carly, he just wants to see in which direction this team goes. Are they taking a young direction? Are they looking for a veteran mentor, something of that nature? That there are a lot of balls up in the air, I guess, on John Carlson, not a lot elsewhere with the blue line. And, one of the things that I've said, and I'll say again here about John Carlson, is if they have no plan of signing him to an extension this next season, I think that it's the right thing to do to try to trade him, to try to get an upgrade. Because, if you want to take a look at Backstrom, if you want to take a look at Oshie, 2 players that spent the final season on the long-term injured reserve, and the Capitals got 0. I think that if there is no master plan of bringing back 74, that you trade him along. So other questions as well is the left side looks pretty buttoned up, and the right side, some question marks. Again, the long term of John Carlson, all things considered, not a lot of questions. One of the things that got drawn into focus in the playoffs was Marty Fehervary getting injured, and the impact that he had on this team, and even the bigger impact of him out of the lineup. That, I think the Capitals could do maybe a bit for a depth move. I know they had Ethan Bear, they had Dylan McIlrath, and Alex Alexiev, but neither, I would say that none of those 3 players really screamed out that, that is going to plug the hole that Marty Fehervary left on this team. So let's dive into that a little bit more in depth about how things could shake out. So here are your projected pairings: Chychrun, Carlson, Sandin Roy, Fehervary, and Trevor Van Riemsdyk. Extras, Alexander Alexiev and Dylan McIlrath. And Dylan McIlrath is a player that I like a lot, has that physicality that if you are playing a team that has a heavy physical game, that Dylan McIlrath is a perfect fit out there. I am totally fine with the Capitals moving on from Alex Ovechkin. I don't think that he set the world ablaze when the Capitals needed him the most. I don't think he was a huge liability. But for a guy that we hear perennially and year after year after year, it's going to be his year, and it's never his year, that I think the Capitals should explore other options. You take a look at it, that there have been opportunities throughout the years for the Capitals to integrate him in there, and he's either been injured or the Capitals decided to acquire a different player that I think that it's time to move on. So let's talk about money here. Jakob Chychrun is now the highest paid defenseman on the team, a guy with offensive flair, a guy that at least in part was brought in to help alleviate some of the pressure off John Carlson, who routinely plays 23 plus minutes a night. But Chychrun did not come cheap, just north of $9 million per year. I think he's worth it. Some people could say they maybe paid him too much or too much term. But if you even wanted Chychrun to entertain the idea of coming back to the Capitals, I think that is what it took. Now you take a look at him. He can skate, can defend, brings offense, and a perfect fit with Carly, who, by the way, is entering the final year, like I said, of his deal at 35. Now, you take a look at it. Chychrun, Carlson, we also saw Sandin play with Carlson some as well. That's how it's penciled in. Keep an eraser. Things might change here, but that is how it could be. So expect John Carlson to see the most out of him in his final year under contract, as it is a final, a contract year. And if he doesn't find a home with the Capitals, get an extension, he is going to want to showcase what kind of player he is. Not that he really needs to, but just really showcase what he has in the tank at 35 to be a good option and to kind of present himself to the other teams in the league. Now, Sandin and Roy quietly rock solid. They'll eat minutes and move the puck efficiently. That pairing might not make headlines, but they'll win you games. And just Sandin, understanding where he fits in, that, he can stop trying to emulate Erik Karlsson, a guy that has a bit more offensive flair, and just understand the lay of the land. And you take a look at Matt Roy as well, kind of, I went into the season knowing that he played solidly for the Kings, but not really knowing what to expect, knowing that he wasn't going to set the world ablaze as far as his offensive output is concerned, but I really liked what I saw in his game. Faravari and TVR are as steady as it gets on a third pair. And, I've already talked about Faravari, love his game. TVR definitely took a step forward this past season, as I think that, he was one of the front runners to get dealt. But all things considered, I like what I saw from Faravari last season. So, you take a look at it, Alex Ovechkin, he's a restricted free agent. And, what I illustrated earlier in the segment is I did not love what I saw from him. And people will point to, well, Dan, he didn't get a lot of playing time. I get that. This is the National Hockey League, the premier hockey league in all of the world. And when you're given your opportunity and, you get that contract and they give you the sweater, you really need to shine. And, you take a look at, he was a guy that was said to really stand out in practice. The players liked playing around him and the effort that he put in. He just did not flash the way that I'd hoped for. Like I said, a restricted free agent who only played 80 NHL games over 4 years. At just under $1 million on a qualifying offer, he's a cheap depth piece if the Capitals choose to hold on to him. But I would like to see what's behind door number 2. Dylan McIlrath, like I said, I love the physicality. What we saw from him, not this last season, but the season before, when he needed to step up and play in the playoffs against the Rangers. I liked it. So the bottom line here is the Capitals have 7 NHL defensemen signed, no free agents needed, no big camp battles expected, with 35.4 of the team's cap tied up on the D core. This is, pretty much a finished project unless they plan on shipping out a body. say that, Chris Patrick does get really aggressive and decides to move on from Carlson if they can't come to terms. That I think, by and large, the D pairings, I think, are pretty buttoned up. The rear guards are pretty well set in place. I don't expect anything too crazy to happen. More questions for sure on the forward line combos, I think, than anything else. All right, in the final segment, we will talk about the Dubois gamble, a deal that sent Darcy Kuemper out to the Kings, and in return, a guy that had a lot of question marks surrounding him. Was it worth it? I'll break it all down straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. In the final segment here, we're talking about PLD, Pierre-Luc Dubois, a guy that, if you take a look at the big picture, 30,000-foot view of his career, impressive. You saw what he brought to Columbus, what he brought to Winnipeg, and a fall with the Kings, and people were willing to, or just ready to kick him aside and say, this guy is trash. I hear quite a bit from different fans. I've heard from Winnipeg fans. I've heard from Columbus fans that, even, what we saw from him from the Kings is he was not fully engaged, even in Winnipeg, even in Columbus. But for me, the way people talk about him, it seems like he's been in the league forever. I want to say 27 years old, good upside, solidified the second line center position, elevated the game of Connor McMichael and Wilson and Protas, whoever played around him. I think an absolute home run for the Capitals. How will this deal age in years to come? I don't know, but all I want to know is live in this moment right here, right now, and say, I liked what I saw from him this last season, and hope that he can continue to solidify that center position, ostensibly second line next season as well. So let's talk about PLD in the final segment here. That was a blockbuster. That was the move. Like I said, Kuemper out, and wasn't the right fit with the Capitals. And Dubois bounced back with 66 points in 82 games. He looked engaged, responsible, and physical. And the second line center, the Capitals desperately needed. Question marks. That for years, who was going to be that second line center? People had thought Kuznetsov, and he was a bit in and out. And you take a look at it. While Kuemper went 31-11-7 in LA, helped the Kings solidify their playoff push. This is kind of what I talked about on this show all along, that Darcy Kuemper was not a poor netminder. It was just a victim of a new coach trying to implement the new systems. And by the time, the Capitals figured it all out, Charlie Lindgren ran away with it. So you take a look at it, best case scenario for Kuemper, best case scenario for Pierre-Luc Dubois. And that's what we call a rare win-win deal in today's NHL. Sometimes there's winners, sometimes there's losers. In this case, it appeared to be all winners. So all things considered, I love what we saw in Pierre-Luc Dubois. And but talking about, Pierre-Luc Dubois and what it meant for the netminding, for the Capitals, like I said, they were looking for stability in between the pipes. After the Holtby era, it was Samsonov, it was Vanacek, Phoenix Copley was in the mix. There was real questions about who was going to solidify it between the pipes for the Capitals. High hopes for Samsonov, and then Vanacek had a lot of hopes. All those hopes dashed as both of those netminders were inconsistent. And Phoenix Copley, another guy that's was within the organization for a long time as well, did not find his forever home with the Capitals. So the Capitals went out last summer and acquired Logan Thompson via trade. And that was, the battle. Who was going to be the front runner, LT or Charlie Lindgren? Charlie Lindgren, who came to the Capitals fairly unknown, solidified his place with the Capitals, that it seemed like all is well. So Logan Thompson, though, is your guy. Signed through 2029. He went 31-6-6 last year with a .910 save percentage. No drama, no panic, just wins. I guess if I had to, try to drill down on something that did concern me about his game was what we saw in the playoffs, the latter part of the season, that there was some questionable performance, but big picture, I liked his game. And Charlie Lindgren, I think, provides the stability that you need. Like I talked about in yesterday's show with Hockey Troll, that I think it is a good tandem. I do not think it is an elite tandem. It is serviceable, and it is the tandem that we will have for the foreseeable future. So that makes it interesting for down on the farm, right? That Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson in particular, was the common thought he was going to be the long-term answer in net. But, with LT signed up for the long-term and Charlie Lindgren here for the long-term as well, when are they going to get their opportunity? That is the big thing, is to know when he's going to fit in. That Hunter Shepard is a guy that could be on the move this summer, as he is an unrestricted free agent, and Garin Bjorklund, who they signed to a 1-year deal. So I do expect that Hunter Shepard will be on the move. How that manifests itself. Is he going to bid adieu to pro hockey and move on to the next chapter? That there has been opportunities in his career to be scooped up by other teams or on the NHL, has not been the case. Will this be his summer to take advantage of a thin goalie market? Centers, goalies, that there is not a lot of viable options. That I think that perhaps a team could take a flyer on a guy like Hunter Shepard that has played very well. And if you take a look at his resume and the mantle of his pro hockey career is quite something. But they did add some stability with Garin Bjorklund, the 2020 pick, re-signed to a 1-year deal, 775 NHL, 110 AHL. He went 21-4-3 with the Stingrays, a 202 goals against and a 927 save percentage. Got a chance to take a look at him in video footage wise. I think he is a viable option. Again, out there, down the pipeline, a someday thing. I think that was a solid move. And, I think to try to keep the pipeline stocked. The one thing I know about the Capitals is that goalie pipeline is always full of options. Still is. I think that, Hunter Shepard, that's my hunch, is that he does not make his return to this team. But with that said, they added some stability and some not long-term, I guess it's a 1-year deal, but they added an answer at least for next year in Garin Bjorklund, and a prove it deal, right? Like, I think that if he knocks it out of the park, that would lend itself to another extension. I think that they ultimately want to get a longer look. What we saw with him in South Carolina was encouraging. And, the opportunities that will present itself in Hershey, no doubt, with injuries or call-ups or whatever the case might be, that I think the Capitals, as far as the net minding is concerned, I'm talking all pro levels, is looking good. And not to mention the players that they have in the junior levels, overseas, that kind of thing, that I think that the pipeline is full and things are looking really solid for the Capitals. So all things considered, just kind of reminiscing here to close out the show, I think the Capitals are in a good spot. There is not a lot I think they need to address, just some question marks. I think that Beauvillier signing to an extension would help answer any questions about the forwards and any big hacks that Chris Patrick might take. I just kind of have a feeling that he's not going to take too big of a hack. I don't think that he could do that. I would like to be pleasantly surprised and see him do something to really put a stamp on this team. That is the move I made that helped better this team. Stamped Chris Patrick. That would be a good option as well. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.